So, my name is Brittni Chicuata. I'm the Director of Economic Rights at the Human Rights Commission. And I'm very excited to be in conversation today with these amazing practitioners who are going to share their both real world and institutional expertise around this conversation on youth investment, youth talent development, youth economic development. So for one, I wanted to start by thanking Director Davis and my colleagues who work on Opportunities for All, and that would be Sarah Williams, who's in the back there, Terry Jones, Danielle Glover, and Nicole Elmore. So for folks who may not be familiar, Opportunities for All is a youth development program here in San Francisco that provides 6-week internships during the summer to transitional age youth. And I don't know if, for the folks who were here yesterday, you might have heard the story that the seed for this program started with some community violence. And Director Davis and some other community leaders met to start talking about what investments we need to be making in our young people to give them opportunities and show them different pathways for their future. You know, a lot of times we don't always know that life is bigger than the block. We might not ever leave our neighborhood, much less our city and state, and see what else is out there for us. And so Opportunities for All was created to be both a youth pathway to employment, an opportunity for networking, kind of touching on what Pinky and others were saying around developing those networks and expanding who we have access to. And also, you know, as a lot of people say, to keep kids out of trouble. But we know that keeping kids out of trouble is not a strategy for economic development, for economic mobility. It really has to be an interpersonal investment. And so that's what I'm excited to talk with you all about today and learn more about the work that you're doing and share it with our guests here. So I'll start right here. I have Alicia Modestino, who's an economist and researcher at Northeastern University in Massachusetts. Carrie Maultsby-Lute, who's the director for the Center for Transformative Action at Mills College in Oakland. And Grieve Chelwa, who's the director of research at the Institute on Race, Power, and Political Economy. Well, thank you all for being here. So I want to start by talking with you all about your entrance into this conversation because, as I said, we're discussing the necessary components of equitable youth and talent infrastructure development. So that's everything from a jobs guarantee and just understanding and incorporating the inherent value that youth bring to our economy. So can you all talk about, you know, how it's not just about that keeping that individual inside or off the street, it's about the health of that child, the exposure of that child, and really how that feeds into our collective well-being?
Sure, I'll start off. First of all, thank you so much to Cheryl and all of you for inviting me to be on this panel. I'm honored and humbled to be in this room. Like, the energy the last 2 days has been absolutely incredible, and it's just invigorated the work I do. And my policy partner in the city of Boston, Rashad Cope, always reminds me to center the why of why we do this work. And as a researcher, you know, sometimes you're crunching the numbers and the why slips away from you. So thank you so much for this opportunity to be here. Speaking about the holistic nature of this, right? And I think you really touched on something around what we're really trying to center around this work is changing the narrative around what youth employment is, particularly in low-income communities and for Black and brown youth. And the way I came into this this space was actually, I had been a senior economist at the Federal Reserve Bank in Boston. I had done a report on youth employment trends and had seen that over the last several decades, fewer and fewer young people were in the workplace, particularly teenagers aged 16 to 19. And there were a variety of different factors we looked at. There's like technology. There's no more Blockbuster video store. We all stream our videos, right? Lots of teenage jobs have kind of been replaced with technology, even those automated checkout lanes, or even just adults, right? Like we've had 2 jobless recoveries, and so adults are taking a lot of the jobs that young people used to have in waitressing and things like that. But when I started casting around for solutions, there were not very many solutions out there, but what I did stumble across was the work that the city of Boston and a bunch of community-based organizations were doing to place young people into jobs. And what struck me so much was it really addressed the disparity in terms of who gets a job as a young person, right? So even though we've seen this decline over time, it's still the case for the most part, that white middle-class kids can find employment. And that's because they have lots of networks and resources in their parents who can find them a job. They face very little discrimination, if any, in the labor market, except, employers are like, oh, we don't want kids on their phone all the time. And they live in places, right, where it's easy to get to the kinds of jobs that they can do. And so what the city of Boston was doing was playing this really instrumental brokering role, and had done it for decades under the Walsh administration, the Menino administration, going back for many, many years. And what was really interesting was over the last 2 decades, that work has really, the narrative has changed. So initially, this was a program that was in response to violence that started in the late 80s, early 90s in Boston. It was really to keep the kids off the street, to warehouse them. And over time, it has really become a pathway, a way to provide meaningful employment experiences for young people, and meaningful experiences that lead them to a path either into a career directly after high school or into college, or even combining those things. And I know we'll talk a little bit more about what the research evidence says, but and so I began that journey with them 8 years ago to be their third-party evaluator and to help document the impacts of this program. And so some of the things we've found over the last several years is that the program, yes, reduces violent crime by 30%. And this is bulletproof kinds of studies. There's more kids who need a job than positions that we have, so we randomly assign these positions using a lottery. And so we have a very bulletproof control group that shows us what's going to happen to young people who do not get these employment experiences. So big reductions in violent crime. But building on top of that, we also see an increase in high school graduation rates, on-time high school graduation rates, or even eventually graduating from high school. And this really stems directly from their work experience. So in all of this, we bring out the youth voice in all of the work that we do. And so, for example, every time I run a focus group, I ask them, what'd you learn this summer? And they all say, man, if you're going to show up 5 minutes late to work, you may as well not show up at all. And this is a revelation, because you do not learn how to show up on time in school. You will get time and time again. Someone will write you a note. You get many, many chances. Eventually you could get suspended, but probably not likely. So where they're learning these good work habits, right, and these motivations is in the workplace. And they bring that back to them, because in the year after participating in the program, their attendance rate increases. And then when their attendance rate increases, their course failures drop. So if you show up every day and you don't fail, oh my God, you graduate. It's not rocket science, right? We know how to make it happen, but it stems from that work experience. And then you layer on top of that more of those kinds of experiences that get them into particular kinds of jobs.
And I feel like you're alluding to a lot of kind of the persistent racialized wealth disparities that we see in the U.S. and the intersection between that work experience and exposure and how that informs how we show up in other parts of our lives, right? And so I wanted to jump to Grieve, because I know you have an expansive global economic perspective, but I want you to kind of talk to your work and research around the concept of stratification economics and kind of the through thread to uplifting economic rights policies as solutions to what Alicia is describing.
Thanks, Brittni, for that question, and thanks, Alicia. We learned a lot from your submission. Everybody's saying gratitude, so gratitude to the San Francisco Human Rights Commission for having us here. Gratitude to my friends, my director, Derek, whom I've learned a lot from.
Gratitude to you for joining us in this time
Yes.
time zone. We got you
in this
time zone.
that's true. Like, I traveled all the way from Zambia, so I think it's probably like 1 a.m. Saturday. So, anyways. So that's an important question, and I think most of what we've heard today, what we heard yesterday, what Alicia just so eloquently articulated here about racial disparities, you see them everywhere. You see them in wealth, you see them in business ownership, you see them in, Derek talked about the IRS. Why is it that the IRS disproportionately targets black folks? And I mean, from a rational point of view, that doesn't make any sense because, poverty levels are high, income levels are lower in that community, wealth levels are low in that community, but why disproportionately target them and not target the folks who have the money? So essentially what stratification economics is trying to do is to make sense of all these group-based inequalities, group-based disparities, whether they be race, whether they be gender, whether they be sexual orientation, whether they be immigrant status, whether they be nationality, whether they be countries. We're trying to understand why is it that these group-based disparities emerge in the first place, and why do they persist? That's essentially what we're trying to understand, right? And what we find in this framework is, why do they persist? Even in the absence, even in the context of where folks are told, if you want to better yourself, go get an education, right? If you want to better yourself, go to school. But what we find in the evidence, what we see in the data is that these group-based disparities, the racial wealth gap gets bigger as you go up the socioeconomic status. As you get more education, the gaps get bigger, right? So what's going on here, right? We're all told that the solution is you pull yourself by your bootstraps, go to school, get an education, and then this gap will disappear. But these gaps persist and they get bigger, right? And this is the contribution of stratification economics, really allowing us to understand that identity itself has transactional value. Identity can be an asset, right? We've been acknowledging ancestors in this particular session. And stratification economics has ancestors who've made like incredible contributions to the field, who point out this idea, this novel idea, this sort of obvious idea when you think about it, that identity can be an asset or can be a debt, given the political economy context. If you're white, identity is an asset. If you're a man, that sort of identity is an asset, right? In the IRS example, right, being black is debt. It's sort of a cost, it's a constraint on you, right? So essentially, this is what stratification economics is doing. And one really important article, right, I don't want to get into professor mode and ascribe and sort of suggest reading, but one really important article that's been incredibly influential to Derek and I and other colleagues who are involved in this work is a 1993 classic article by the critical race theorist Cheryl Harris. And she wrote a paper called Whiteness as Property, right? And that piece really articulates in a way that I cannot articulate essentially what stratification economics is trying to do, right? And Brittni, you talk about inclusive economic rights, and what we are proposing at the Institute is we want a world, right? We want to go towards a moral political economy, a world where that sort of link between identity and outcomes is sort of cut, right? We cut that Gordian knot between your identity should not determine your lot in life. Now, like Derek said, we're not arguing for sort of the disappearance of identity, right? There's value, the aesthetic value to being a black person. There's aesthetic value to being, a Native American. The aesthetic value to being a Jamaican living in Queens or wherever, right? There's aesthetic value in those things. But what we are calling for is that identity should not have transactional value. Right? Your identity should not map onto outcomes. Your identity should not determine whether, as a young person, you get into an internship program, right? And which is incredibly powerful. I mean, getting an internship program means you're learning, you're acquiring certain skills. That's investment that will pay off in the long run, right? So what we want is to create a world where your identity does not have transactional value, to create a world where everybody has a baseline set of resources that enables them to live full, fulfilled lives of agency, right? We had a conversation earlier about entrepreneurship. Well, if you want to be an entrepreneur, you should be an entrepreneur, right? Your race or your gender shouldn't be the thing that limits you from becoming an entrepreneur. If you want to be a movie director, you should be a movie director, right? So essentially what we want to do with inclusive economic rights is to create this political economy where everybody has a chance in life. Everybody has a chance to fully self-actualize themselves, right? And so that's essentially our contribution in stratification economics.
Thank you. And I think what you're saying is reminding me, as far as identity and its transactional value, it's reminding me of the Combahee River Collective, which was a group of Black feminists in the 70s that included Audre Lorde, and they were the initial folks who coined the term identity politics. Now that's been undermined and bastardized by a lot of different folks, but I think that, the thread there was that recognizing what I bring to the table because of my experiences as an asset, not something to create additional barriers. And so, Carrie, I'm hoping that you can jump in to talk about, a lot of the work that you're doing at Mills College and more broadly, how we might think about strategically building pathways that are holistic, that are equitable, that center community experiences, and see, as Director Davis has said a number of times, the value of that cultural wealth, and that rewards it, and doesn't just capitalize off of it, as Pinky said, counting the views from this woman with 100 followers and making millions without compensating for her contributions.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I want to start off with expressing gratitude as well. I feel like the gratitude has been a running theme in my life more recently since reading a book called Braiding Sweetgrass. It's about indigenous knowledge, learning from plants, and just the power of having reciprocity and gratitude for everything we do. So I'm grateful for Dr. Davis, grateful for you, Brittni, grateful for you, Alicia, for inviting me here as well, and grateful for all of you for attending these very important conversations. It's been so, these conversations have been so relevant. Alicia and I attended yesterday and just had a wonderful experience just learning about reparations and learning about, all these wonderful emergent models for developing our community. So in gratitude, I come to you from East Oakland, and yes, woo-woo. And I think a lot about, pathways and youth empowerment, especially as East Oakland, just, like San Francisco, has been going through so much gentrification issues surrounding displacement, and thinking about how can we ensure that our communities are getting better and beautified, but at the same time, retaining the culture and the people that have been there, long-standing residents forever, that made it what it is. And so those are some of the things that are keeping me up. And my work at Mills College, which it's actually now Mills College at Northeastern University, which is how I'm connected now with
It's still
Alicia.
hard. It doesn't roll off the tongue.
I know, it doesn't. It's hard for me too. I'm an alum from there, so it's really hard. But, so my lens is one that I'm a professor of practice. I teach marketing at Mills College, and my focus is on experiential learning. I've been doing that work for a while now, and I've also taught programs at Merritt College. Any Merritt College folks? No, Peralta Community College District people? Okay, all right. It's very important pathways when we think about, our youth and those folks that have less access, wonderful starting points. And so I've done programmatic work at Merritt College within their career technology education department, trying to infuse entrepreneurship into some programs that aren't traditionally entrepreneurial, like nursing, landscape, horticulture. How can we think about not only pathways into jobs, but pathways into businesses? And so that's, that was my first entry point into youth development work. And then from there, moving into, my work at Mills College now at Northeastern University, it's centered around this idea that applied learning is some of the best learning that you can take. That's experiential learning. What it means is it's basically project-based learning. So I take real organizations, businesses in the community, and I have students work on those organizations, developing marketing plans for them. So students come out of that experience with experience being a consultant, right, to a client. They're working in teams. They're failing. They're, they're just doing real work. And the power of it is we're leveraging that. So we're helping these, smaller businesses, organizations that prioritize Black businesses by partnering with Project Runway, ICA Fund Good Jobs, ESO Ventures, organizations that are committed to Black businesses. And so those are the businesses that we're working with and helping them with their marketing strategy support. So it's been, just phenomenal seeing the outcomes from that. So students go on, they put it on their resume, they put it on LinkedIn. I'm talking to alums every day, so I really see myself as a connector to talent. The exciting thing about Mills College, I know it's still new and fresh, but the opportunity that I see now with the merging with Northeastern University is around research, industry, and experiential learning, which is something that Northeastern is really known for. So when we think about W.E.B. Du Bois and his focus on liberal arts, like the whole person, that doesn't go away. We can have both W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington, which was all about industry. We're like their baby. If they were to have a baby, right, that would be us. So, we can have both. And so that's...
But Carrie, I want to sit here with you for a second because you spoke to being in East Oakland, and there definitely is a shared narrative being from San Francisco and how rapidly we have been invisibilized and kind of erased from the city, despite the cultural cachet that we have contributed for generations, despite the first Black Studies department being founded here in San Francisco at San Francisco State, despite the Human Rights Commission being created in 1964 as a response to the sit-ins and the protests that were happening here. The height of the civil rights movement was absolutely at San Francisco City Hall's doorstep as well. Yet when you go out into community, we are so invisibilized. You wouldn't know that Black folks did anything but break into cars if you were not from San Francisco and didn't have relationships. And so I really want to sit here with you and open it to all of our panelists, but talk about how we work with communities when we're in communities that are rapidly changing. How do we minimize displacement and erasure when we're, quote, bringing things to communities to improve them?
That's a really good question. I think like Carrie and I are actually working on this together. So I think we can share our insights that we've been working on. One of the things that Northeastern's known for in Boston is working in the backyard. So we're not Harvard, we're not MIT. We call them the other universities across the river.
They don't even call themselves, I went to the school in Boston when you meet someone from Harvard.
So if you ask City of Boston or if you ask Commonwealth of Massachusetts, who do you want to work with? If it's not a funding thing, they'll say Northeastern, because we have worked with the Boston Police Department. We have worked with the Office of Workforce Development. We have worked with the Boston Public Health Commission for years, for decades, because we stick with them through the entire cycle of whatever it is to solve the public problem, because we live and we work there in the backyard. And so that's kind of the iteration that I've been doing with City of Boston, where we don't just fly in and study about people, right? We don't just extract data. We don't tell them what the solutions are, right? The model that we have been working with is in partnership, in these research practice partnerships that are decades in the making, where we co-create not just like the data and things like that, but the question, like what is the question that they actually need to have answered, right? Not just what I think as an academic is important. And then even interpreting, what comes out of that effort. A lot of times, right, economists can collect a lot of data and we can come up with a wrong answer, to be honest, if you don't know how things are working on the ground. Like City of Boston has saved my ass a lot of times from making really dumb conclusions because I don't understand how the program's operating or how the community is working. And then helping them design a solution and then sticking around to see if it works, right? We don't just write that little paragraph at the end of the paper, and now I think you should do this, and then fly off, right? Like we stick around and we have helped them evaluate that solution and then reiterate on it. So, an example of this is even like who gets these jobs in Boston, right? And we uncovered in the City of Boston, even though there's multiple rounds of random assignment, you might think that's super fair. Who signs up first for these jobs? it's white exam school kids from the prestigious high schools. So if you have multiple rounds of random assignment, you have a disparity at the end of the day of who gets those jobs. Right, because there's limitations on how many jobs there are. So we showed the city of Boston this, and they were horrified. And we worked with them, and I wrote an algorithm so we could make sure that we reserved enough spaces, right, so that we would equitably distribute these opportunities. And then, and now we're sticking with them again. We're using all this research evidence, like we did during COVID, to get more resources into the program and to make sure that the opportunities are going to the right folks. So that kind of success that we had during COVID, where we got Mayor Walsh to put an extra $4 million of CARES Act funding into the program and save it during COVID, where other programs had shut down. We saved 10,000 young people's jobs during COVID. Those kinds of wins were the kinds, yeah, it was amazing. Those kinds of, and he committed to not only employing the same number of youth, but at the same number of hours and the same rate of pay, because half of our kids pay a household bill with their summer jobs earnings. But we had the data to show that, right? And that helped the community preserve those jobs. So when we acquired, merged, whatever, with Mills, I went to the provost and I said, we could do this in Oakland. We can do this kind of work there. And we can do it authentically like no other university can, because we have faculty at Mills who have all of those community connections. I don't understand, I don't know the context in Oakland. I would never presume to fly in and be like, and this is how you should run your summer jobs program, right? But Carrie
You're
does.
speaking to that important technological aspect. And I'm wondering if you can kind of speak to that practice too that you're experiencing in Oakland.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to pass it to Carrie and say, and so now we're working in partnership together to develop these kinds of initiatives at Mills College in the fundamental connections that she already has, including a summer youth program that will have operating both at the Boston program, but also at the Mills campus as well.
Yeah, and I'm really excited about the work that Alicia's done with summer youth employment and the data that, she's created over time and reviewed to just make things better. One of the important things is to think about what are those industries that are most lucrative, that are industries of the future. So we're thinking about when we design a summer youth employment program, climate tech. How are we looking at industries again that are going to lead to well-paying jobs over in high road careers, as well as how are we going to connect with these organizations that are already on the ground doing a lot of the work? Because we can't deny there's a number of summer programs. There's probably people in here right now that are running summer youth employment programs, and so connecting with you all and how can we build off of some of the amazing work that you're doing. So that's going to be important, as well as connecting into community colleges and accessing folks that they already have learn to earn programs, and so how can we connect with them, build off that so students are actually getting college credits while they are learning, and then while we are additionally earning for them. So those are just one example of the excitement, the initiatives that we're going to be working on together, and why this is great partnership.
Thank you both. Grieve, do you want to jump in at all about the field work and just the experiences or perspective you might have on centering and working with community or with the most impacted communities when designing these programs?
That's an important question. I just want to say I'm learning so much from Carrie and Alicia here. They're doing fascinating work, and I think the lesson from their work is essentially that these demonstrations, or if one can call them that are happening in different parts of the country, the ones that you articulate in Massachusetts, I think that, like we always say at the Institute, the North Star is for these kinds of programs to really be like, publicly funded, publicly guaranteed, right? All young people should have a choice of a job and job experience when they leave high school, right? And that's just, as the evidence is showing, that just sets you up for the future, right? Those jobs programs, if they're publicly guaranteed, should have an eye to the future, what the industries of the future will look like. You're talking about climate tech, robotics, whatever it might be, right? The things that you can't get in school, but the things that you really need to survive in the workplace, right? So I think it's fascinating stuff. In terms of centering communities that have been left behind, I think This is essentially the basis of our inclusive economic rights framework, right? And we call it inclusive. One would say, is it oxymoronic to say inclusive and then economic rights? Because rights should be guaranteed to all, right? But essentially, we are very thoughtful about that, because we've learned from history, again, this stratification economics about the weaponization of identity. We've learned from history that in periods where economic opportunities have been expanded for all, in quotation marks, certain groups have been left out, right? And that is why we have to be intentionally and purposefully inclusive, right? So we have to include in expanding opportunities, be they youth training programs, youth job guarantees, guaranteed income, whatever it might be, that we should always be intentional about being inclusive, right? Something as revolutionary as the Social Security Act of the 1930s left out certain groups, right? By design, by implementation, certain groups were left out, and by management, certain groups were left out. But what we are trying to articulate at the Institute is that when we want to expand economic opportunities, when we want to empower people, we should do it in a way that's purposefully inclusive. We should have an eye to make sure the program is anti-racist, it's anti-sexist, it's inclusive of identity group stratifications.
Thank you, absolutely. And with that eye towards the future, I mean, San Francisco, Oakland, I'm sure Boston, so many cities nationwide and globally are experiencing workforce shortages as a result of many pressures from the pandemic. So be that the Great Resignation, be that remote working and how that's kind of transformed what our business cores look like, or be it, having at-home requirements, so caretaking responsibilities either for our children or for our elders. And so, Alicia, you were touching on this a bit earlier, but I'm wondering if we can talk a little bit about the opportunities that policymakers and business leaders are missing when it comes to analyzing that supply and demand data, and then just the rising share of the labor force that young people make up, and how we can really start building strong pipelines into these diverse industries.
Absolutely. I think one of the exciting things that's happening out of the pandemic is that we were able to experiment a lot with these programs. And so we've become aware that it's not youth workforce development, it's youth development, right? And we need to be much more intentional about that and giving young people lots of different opportunities on their journey as they move through high school and graduate and move out into the world. And so a couple of the things going on in Boston during the pandemic, one of the ways we could save so many jobs, even when everything was shut down, is we created some virtual kinds of options. And one of those was a Learn and Earn program where we paid for young people to take community college courses. But we paid the course and we paid them for their time taking the course. So you wouldn't have to choose between having a job and earning money in the summer. Remember, I just told you like half of them pay a household bill with their summer earnings. So you wouldn't have to choose between earning.
Say that again, half of the youth.
Half of the youth are paying, and I'm talking they're paying rent, they're paying a utility, they're paying a cell phone bill. I wish my kids would pay their cell phone bill. And like that statistic has probably helped us more than anything in convincing the mayor's cabinet to put money into this program at a time when the city budget was hemorrhaging, right? In May 2020, cities did not know if they were going to be able to keep the doors open, let alone put extra money into a program, right? So bringing that kind of research evidence, that's what I do. I try to make my city partners look good, right? And I bring these things to the table that I think they can use. So Learn and Earn was one option. One of the things that we're really thinking about is to be more intentional about laddering these opportunities, right? I have seen how a 6-week summer program can be transformational for young people. I tell you about the focus groups and things like that I do. The last focus group, large one that I did right before pre-plague was at Sanofi Genzyme. So Boston is very unusual in that we have a lot of real private sector placements. I'm talking, Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, Sanofi Genzyme, Mass General Hospital, right? We went to this end of the summer celebration, and there was a group of probably 20 young people who were reflecting on their experiences. And this one young black man talked about how when he came to this summer internship, he was assigned to IT, and he thought it was really boring. And he said, but you know what? if I don't do my job in IT, nobody else can do their job. And then he went on to explain like all this technical stuff that I don't even understand or remember. But it was obvious that this experience was transformational for him. He had not thought about a career in this way or in technology at all. And so those are the kinds of experiences that we want young people to have, but we want them to not just have one experience, we want to link that, right? So some of the new current thinking going into the future is how can we move some of this into year-round employment, structured employment, or learn and earn programs, or how could we even give young people a stipend for the entire year? Your income is guaranteed, and we're just going to plug and play these different experiences that are going to lead you to a path at the end, right? Wouldn't it be great if I gave you a learn and earn course on healthcare medical technology, and then I gave you an internship in the summer working for one of the hospitals, right? And so that's what we're doing now, is we're being more intentional about laddering these things, badging them, so they get credit in high school for some of these experiences, and it's a badge, a digital badge they can bring to an employer that's recognized by City of Boston that says this young person had this experience. They have developed this set of skills, and being more intentional about how we can put kids on a path.
Beautiful.
I just want to say something in addition to what Alicia said, which is fascinating, about the beauty of experimenting, even as a young person, right?
Yeah.
Trying to figure out, right? So, trying to figure out what it is you want to spend your life doing, and just thinking about what we lose out as a society from the fact that we're limiting those opportunities for young people to experiment in this way, right? It's just think about what we're losing out, like the unquantifiable stuff. All these brilliant young people who have not had a chance to find out exactly what they want to spend their life doing, right? And I think we ought to do it. It has to be public policy that says, try a bunch of things out and see what works.
Yeah.
Right?
No, it's like some ways limiting imagination. Like give people a chance to dream and think differently and have exposure to these different
It's good for them, but it's good for society, right? You know, maybe who knows, man, somebody who would have found a cure for cancer, right? Just never had that opportunity to just work in a hospital, or, exactly. So I just want,
That's powerful. I mean, it's really like the idea of failing up, iterating, like just having this startup mindset and just trying as many things as we can until we, land on something that feels right. So I love that. I think you were going to say something, Alicia.
I was just going to riff off what you said. I think like sometimes the best summer job that you have is a summer job you hated, and you realize I do not want to do this for the rest of my life.
Save me from law school.
One of my own kids, or even just gives you a perspective on what you're doing the rest of the year, right? One of my sons worked in a pasta factory, no joke, on the South Shore, and he worked, he stood 10 hours a day putting raviolis into boxes, and at the end of the summer, I was like, what's more fun, like working in the pasta factory or school? And he's like, school. Right. But one of the things that you talked about was even how this benefits not just the young person, but their families and their communities, right? And so on top of this being a huge cash transfer program that flies under the radar and is super bipartisan, right? Who doesn't want young people working? It also benefits communities like City of Boston, New York, where you have a big program, Chicago. They cannot run their summer camps without summer youth employment to fill those positions. And so that's keeping the cost of childcare low for people in those cities and helping those communities be able to care for other younger children in the summer. And then the last thing I'll just say is, to be perfectly frank, in Boston, this is the only way that the private sector gets any diversity whatsoever. So when I was a senior economist at the Federal Reserve Bank, every person of color, except for one, was someone who came through the summer jobs program and then had a career at the Federal Reserve Bank for 30 years with a federal pension at the end of it, right? But this is something that private sector employers have come to the table with in Boston, not just because of the altruistic nature of it, but also because they have realized that they need to start much earlier, right, and be much more intentional about diversity.
Yes, it's definitely mutually beneficial. I'm sorry, were you going to jump in?
Well, I was going to jump in and just kind of also bring it back to the business side, because your question was around business leaders and what they can do as well. And there's a movement around STARS, right? Skilled through alternative routes. paths. This idea that you don't have to get all of your education at these traditional pathways in college. Like, there's so many other ways, especially certificates. There's just so many programs that now can offer you wonderful skill sets that won't require you to take on the levels of debt, and that will get you into some of those entry road jobs. And so just thinking about companies like Square, like Google, you're seeing that a lot in the tech world, where they are dropping their degree requirements, and they are just going after folks that have the skill set. And so when I was working at Salesforce, some of the smartest people that I worked with came in through Year Up, came in through, other programs that just provided them with, some programming, coding experience. And so just, recognizing that that's also, companies dropping the degree requirements for certain roles can also help and really lead to equity gains that we're after. So.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this has been an ongoing conversation in the city of San Francisco around minimum qualification requirements and how, certain degrees or just the way that we word certain applications and the requirements that we have really limit the pool that we're able to even select from. So thank you for that. I wanted to, in our final minutes, to give members of the audience an opportunity to ask any questions that you might have. And I saw Dr. Scott's hand go up.
Thank you so much for everything you've shared. One of the things that I've found that works for our young people and that worked in the past, and I'm a senior, but I came up during a time, way back when, I came up during a time where all schools taught home economics life skills. When they took those life skills out of the schools, cultures, assurance, feeling good about yourself, knowing how to live on your own. More children are at home with parents because they don't know how to make it on their own. They don't know how to survive. We had life skills training, home economics, cooking, sewing, auto shop, machine shop, mechanics. We had wood shop, all of that.
All the shops.
And we knew how, yes, but we knew how to work life. We felt good, we felt strong, no matter what. No matter what. Budgeting, all of that. So along with giving our children this opportunity, we need to work hard with bringing back those skills. Our children stand out on the street, let a tire go flat, go steal another car instead of fixing the tire. Yeah, no, but that's what happens. That is, I've talked to the children. I'm in the street. I live as a missionary. I'm serious. I lived in the streets in West Oakland where the Panther Party rose and fell, San Francisco, Fillmore, Hunters Point. They don't know how to change a tire. I had to show them. They didn't know how to put...
Well, I hear what you're getting to,
yes,
Dr. Scott.
and then go get another car. But what we need to do is make them aware.
I hear you.
Teach them,
Yes.
train them. And even our young girls, our young ladies, the cooking, the sewing, all of that.
So
Thank
I think-
you,
I want
Dr.
somebody to
Scott.
cook for me. Thank you, Ms. Dr. Scott. I don't know. Go ahead, Elisa.
So one of the advantages of the Summer Youth Employment Program that's different from young people even just getting a job out in the private sector is it comes with programming that wraps around that young person, right? So it's structured in a couple different ways. One is to deliver some of those life skills, right? So not quite the cooking and cleaning, but certainly the life skills around understanding finances, understanding how to get another job, right? So it comes with, learning, practicing how to interview, how to put together a resume, how to even write or speak professionally and to work in teams. And we see that in all of our research evidence as well. It also, though, comes with working in your communities, because a lot of these are community-based organizations, so not just the summer camps, but other kinds of community-based organizations. And one of the things that was the huge standout for us on our survey is young people reporting that they feel more connected to their communities, right? And you see this because they're working every day with the families and the young people in their communities, and they feel good about themselves about that. So that's like one of the last things I would say as well, is that you know, even a couple of my own kids, you might think professors' kids must be super smart in school. Not all, but the self-worth that my boys got from their jobs then carried them through a lot of other challenges, whether it be in school or in other kinds of things. And so there is something that goes along with this. And in addition, the program also makes sure that your supervisor is a good mentor, right? And so we're even trying to extend some of those things into the other kinds of private sector jobs, because this summer was a little bit of a challenge. It was a strong summer youth employment market. You know, Target's paying $20, $22 an hour. That is hard to compete with when your city job pays minimum wage, which is nothing to sneeze at. It's, you know, $15.50, but it's not the same. So how can we extend some of those supports to the young people who are in those other kinds of jobs to give them those kinds of life skills that you're talking about?
But another thing that I hear from both Dr. Scott's comment and question, as well as what you were saying about self-worth, is just this opportunity to help young people understand what they might not be exposed to. And that, in turn, makes them better advocates for their community, right? Because if we don't know what we're not getting, then and we live in a way where it's like, this is my normal, so this must be everyone's normal. I mean, that was my experience when I went from public school and middle school to a private school, wealthy private school. I was like, oh, I didn't know people lived like this. And so, you know, depending on where you grow up, you might know, but you don't know the disparities in wealth as far as our different experience.
I just want to add, Dr. Scott's comment is like an excellent comment. And one sees this trend even in the universities, right? This movement towards STEM, right? At the expense of humanities, right? Like this idea that we ought to invest, the idea is we should invest in our people to the extent that it's extractable in the marketplace, right? Which is a terrible way of doing things. Yeah, that's just the point I want to make. We have to rethink that we should invest in our young people just because. We should invest in our young people so we can empower them, and not so that we shouldn't think of them as human capital to later be extracted, right? You see this trend in many universities, especially the resource-constrained ones. The humanities departments are closing down. So people can't read Langston Hughes, for example, but they should just know how to program, and that's all, right? So I think, yeah.
No, very true. And that's kind of what Jhumpa was saying yesterday about, you know, moving away from good jobs versus bad jobs. Like, we need that diversity of industry, right? I don't know if I saw any other hands go up. Yes, Miss Diane Gray.
And then we will have to make this our last comment.
And this is our last, as Director Davis said.
Yeah, thank you all for the wonderful panel this morning and talking about youth development. I work with youth and getting them into college at 100% College Prep. But what was just mentioned was mentoring, and the corporations, the agencies that you encourage to be a part of the program. How do you support them in mentoring those young people and setting that all up? Because that's truly, truly important. There have been some situations in the past that some of my young people did not have that, and their workplaces were not ready to receive them and to support them and to mentor them. Because I think that's so important in this piece.
Yeah, that is hugely important. That's one of the reasons why we want to even be able to extend the program to provide that kind of support to other jobs that are going on around the city, because not every job is designed to develop a young person, right? So that Target job, even though it pays a lot, is super extractive, right? They're just going to try to get as many hours as they can out of that young person, especially right now when they're having a hard time hiring. They're not going to worry about are they going to develop the right skills or anything, right? But that is what what we do. And so some of what the city of Boston does is provides training for the supervisors. It's required training. I mean, it's not long. It's a couple hours of training, but at least makes them mindful. We also have it's called the Work-Based Learning Plan, something that the Department of Labor developed, but it's required for employers to fill it out. It's kind of like a performance review sort of thing, right? But it's requiring them to ask, like, what are the skills that this young person is learning, and how is that going to match up to what's going on in the labor market in a very intentional way? And then, I run a survey every year where I'm surveying 10,000 young people, and part of what we ask them is, what was your supervisor like? Did they prepare you for the job? Did they tell you what was expected of you? Were you able to come to them with problems? Did they act as a mentor to you? And we kind of have a whole list of things with that so that we can actually evaluate these supervisors. And there have been some employers who just either they're not designed to be mentoring young people, they're not good at, or some places that were just really bad, right? That were just abusive, not abusive, but just extractive, right? It just wasn't a good match. And if you're not a good match for the program, then you're no longer in the program. And but they're very intentional about that. And that's a huge piece of this is mentoring. And we're learning more and more that mentoring piece is really what's driving a lot of these good impacts.
Thank you. So can I just do a rapid fire as we close, hear from each of you 10 to 30 seconds on your hopeful vision as far as the collective impact of youth development investments?
Well, I can start. I think we should take the learnings that Alicia and Carrie just shared with us and try to scale them, try to figure out movements. How can we make this sort of federal policy so that every young person has this kind of experience that's just been articulated here, right? I think that's the general idea. Every young person, when they graduate high school, has an option to go and figure out what they want to do in life. And that requires that they try out different things. Those things are there. Those things pay a decent salary, right? And also this other holistic approach, some of the evidence that Alicia shared about what you earn as a young person on this job, half of it goes to supporting your larger family. So we kind of try to think about holistically, how do we fix all those systemic issues? So that's my sort of hope.
Great. That's beautiful. Yeah. Well, my hope, it's big and it's also localized. I'm thinking about our earlier conversation surrounding development and displacement and that connection between youth empowerment and these pathways to displacement and how displacement disrupts the pathways. So my hope is that we are able to radically collaborate with organizations throughout that are doing work that's talking about housing, work that's talking about restorative economics and new ways of actually being as far as our capitalistic structures, and that we can continue to have better pathways that are really transparent so kids and youth can tinker and fail and have the opportunity to experience a lot of different ways of being, have the mentorship that's needed, and that we can have our communities be beautiful and be thriving with people that look like us in them. And so it's not this, either or. So my vision is for thriving business corridors with small businesses that are Black and brown and young people running them and being the leaders that are growing our city. So that's what I hope to be true.
I'm going to start from the dismal and then get to the positive, because we're economists. That's what we do. I've been awfully positive as an economist up here, just for the record. Derek was making me look good. No, the dismal thing is when I started doing this work, one of the reasons for the disparities in employment between Black and white youth was the fact that 50% of Black youth said they were looking for their first job. There's a huge disparity in terms of even getting into the labor market to start with. And that leads to persistent disparities down the road. So right now, even, right over this summer, this was one of the best youth job markets we've seen in years, because employers have been desperate to hire people, right? And they suddenly rediscovered young people. They don't even worry about if they're on their phones or nothing, right? They're just like, You can wash dishes, or you can wait on tables, or you can take tickets. Come on in, right? We got a job for you. Do you know what the unemployment rate was for 16 to 19-year-olds in August, which is like the height of the summer youth employment? 1.5%. Nope. So for whites, it was 9%. Because young people are still, the last to be hired. For black youth, it was 18%. Okay? It's twice. So my starting with the dismal is to say that these kinds of experiences that we're providing through the public sector are absolutely essential. And I am so excited by what is going on in San Francisco, the additional funding that has been coming in as well to expand that program. It is essential good work that you all are doing here, and it needs to continue and it needs to expand. I think, absolutely. I think the thing that I'm most excited about is that now that we know a lot more about the impacts that these programs have, and we have now the intentionality behind it, my hope is that we can create career pathways where there's on-ramps and off-ramps for everybody, but especially for young people, right? So, if you might start off after high school not knowing exactly what you do, but you get into a job, great. But then we want to be able to provide you with the on-ramp back into training if you need to further yourself, or a community college course, or a skills-based kind of thing, right? And you might go off and do, another kind of job, right, in the career ladder, and then realize you need another piece of education, right? So we need to be building in these places for people to take time out when they need to. Sometimes you need to take time out to care for your family. Sometimes
you need to rest.
You need to rest. Sometimes, life throws you a curveball and you get chucked out of the labor market. But we need to make these on and off ramps seamless so that once we get a young person into the labor market and we get them on their way, we can make sure that there's many ways for them to go in different directions and to keep themselves on a path to prosperity.
Beautifully said. Join me in thanking Alicia, Carrie, and Grieve for this conversation.
And thank you to Brittni Chicuata for moderating this panel. Thank you, Brittni. Before folks start to exit out, let me give you a little bit of guidance for those of you who plan to stay with us. And I also just want to recognize and thank Barbara and Dr. Scott, because we want to be intentional about being intergenerational, and I appreciate them for being here and making sure that we, remember from whence we've come.